Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do my book haul for the month of November. And I've been bad. This is going to be my largest book haul ever, bar none. You can't quite see because of the way the camera is positioned, but this is a large pile of books right here. And there's a second pile of books almost as high behind it. So altogether, I have 40 books that I have brought into my library this month. That's a lot. In my defense, though, before we get going, I will say that only about 15 of these books are things that would traditionally have been hauled during the month. Two things happened. One, a very kind subscriber sent me some books as a gift, so we'll talk about those. And then the other thing that happened is that the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula did a book sale. They do one every year, and for whatever reason, I never know when it's going to happen, so if I catch it, it's entirely a matter of luck, and I haven't caught it for years. We happened to go to the fort where they have a really great path to walk dogs to take Teddy there, and as we were leaving we saw the sign that there was a book sale, so I did some damage. It was one of those deals where you pay $10, they give you a grocery bag and you can fill the bag. Doesn't matter how many books you can cram in there, it's just $10. And I went on the last day of the sale, so basically what they said is ordinarily you'd have to buy a second bag, but because it was the last day, they said if you fill your bag you can just do another bag. So altogether I got 40 books, and again, only 15 are things that would usually be in a book sale. Now, book haul. I'm going to condense things. Ordinarily in a book haul, I will talk about what the book is about. I'll read a little bit from the beginning. If the video starts running really long, and I imagine that it will, I will probably not spend a lot of time on those things when we get to the book sale parts, the books that I got from the sale at the Historical Museum. We'll see how things go. Just know I may rush through a little more than usual just to cover 40 books. 40 books. What have I done? You may have also noticed that I had to shift things in my library this month. I haven't talked about it, but The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois used to be faced out right here, which was perfect because it was over my shoulder and I loved that book. Now it's over there. I had to shift a lot around in order to fit 40 books onto my shelves this month. But let's not spend a whole lot of time just talking. Let's get into the book haul so we can go. First, I got Witness by Jamel Brinkley. This is one of the books that I've been really excited to read this year. It's a story collection published by FSG, and I am really excited to read this book. I kind of love the cover, these sort of ghostly fingerprints running up, which will make sense to you when I read the description of what this book is about. And actually, before we get going, I should also point out that I am filming this the day before Thanksgiving. I'm going to post it later in the month, but I'm filming it now. So because it's the day before Thanksgiving, Teddy is running around like a madman. Excited, so you might hear puppy paws running around. Joel is in the kitchen doing prep, so I kind of needed to film this so I can go help him. Just if you hear background noise, that's what it is. What does it mean to really see the world around you, to bear witness? And what does it cost us, both to see and not to see? In these 10 stories, each set in the changing landscapes of contemporary New York City, a range of characters, from children to grandmothers to ghosts, live through the responsibility of perceiving and the moral challenge of speaking up or taking action. Though they strive to connect with, stand up for, care for, and remember one another, they often fall short, and the structures they build around those ambitions and failures shape their futures as well as the legacies and prospects of their communities and their city. In its portraits of families and friendships lost and found, the paradox of intimacy, the long shadow of grief, and the meaning of home, Witness enacts its own testimony. Here is a world where fortunes can be made and stolen in just a few generations, where strangers might sometimes show kindness, while those we trust, doctors, employers, siblings, too often turn away, where joy comes in snatches, flowers on a windowsill, dancing in the street, glimpsing your purpose, change on the horizon. That is Witness by Jamel Brinkley. I should also mention this was included in the New York Times 100 Notable list books of 2023. I will have a link to my video about that down below. And I really think it's a good prime candidate to be on the New York Times top 10 books of 2023. If that has posted by the time this posts, I'll link to it down below. But I am really excited about this book. I know a lot of people are not really into short stories. I am, so this is just right up my street. So I usually read from the opening of a book in my book haul. I'm just going to read from the first story in this one, which is called Blessed Deliverance. Who knew that old-ass head-ass was capable of even greater feats of head-assery? Our little crew had become accustomed long ago to his foolishness, the imbecilic way he walked around Bed-Stuy with his lips swelled up, da-da, all the various look-at-me antics. We were bored with him. He was dull. The 5 of us paid him no mind. He might as well have been a fire hydrant. That is the opening of Witness by Jamel Brinkley, the first of many books we're going to be talking about here. Next is something I've actually already read, So Late in the Day, Stories of Women and Men by Claire Keegan. Huge fan of Claire Keegan. You can see small things like these faced out on my shelf right here. Foster is right next to it. Those are the 3 books that have been released in continuous years here in the United States. I recently had been talking about her and mentioned that, so 2 of the stories in here are from previous story collections of hers. One of the stories is from The New Yorker. The other 2, one of them comes from Antarctica, one comes from Walk the Blue Fields. At the time I mentioned that in a Friday Reads, I thought that those books had not been published in the United States. They had been, close to when they were originally published. So they do exist in the United States and are actually both on Scribd now, so I have saved them to my list. But at the time, I just hadn't realized that because it feels like the small things like these is where she really exploded on the scene. I just wanted to correct that error. This is published by Grove. Again, tiny little thing. It's 3 stories. Really great. I am a huge fan of Claire Keegan. She's an Instabuy author for me, so naturally this ended up here. I will not read the blurb. I'm just going to tell you that these are stories about women and men and their relations and the sort of line between the ideal sort of utopian vision of what a relationship between a man and woman can be and the sort of nightmare worst case scenario and how it can tip into violence. It's really good, very well done. Claire Keegan is a stunning, stunning, stunning writer. So let's just read from the first story, which is So Late in the Day. On Friday, July 29th, Dublin got the weather that was forecast. All morning, a brazen sun shone across Marion Square, reaching onto Cathal's desk, where he was stationed by the open window. A taste of cut grass blew in every now and then a close breeze stirred the ivy on the ledge. When a shadow crossed, he looked out, a gulp of swallows skirmishing high up in camaraderie. And we'll stop there. That is So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. I've already read it, and it is fantastic, just like everything else that has been published in the United States that I have read so far. Now, we have The Lost Journals of Sacajewea by Debra Magpie Earling. This had been recommended to me by Chelsea at Montana Book Company earlier this year, and I really thought about buying it at that point, but I sort of held off. It sounded interesting. It is supposed to be a little bit violent, and that was the thing that made me hold off a little bit, and then Publishers Weekly included it in the Best Fiction Books of 2023. I'll link my reaction to that list in the description box down below as well, and that is where I said, you know what, I should just get a copy of this book. So I called Montana Book Company and ordered a copy, and here it is. This is published by Milkweed Editions, and basically, as you can imagine, it's about Sacajewea. There's a blurb from Morgan Salty, the author of Night of the Living Res, which I love. Immensely moving and transcendent. So I'm not going to read the whole blurb, but basically, I'll just tell you, raised among the Limhi Shoshone, in this telling, the young Sacajewea is bright and bold, growing strong from the hard work of learning all ways to survive, gathering berries, water, roots, and wood. And it's sort of about her life. And like I said, there is supposed to be some violent imagery, especially around hunting. You know, bad things happen to her as an Indigenous woman in a society that was being colonized by white people. That is the thing that made me hold off. However, Chelsea really loves this book, and I do trust Chelsea, and Publishers Weekly included it in their best books of the year. So here it is. I'm willing to give it a try. I don't think I'm going to manage to squeeze it in before the end of the year, but I am looking forward to reading it. Here is how The Lost Journals of Sacajewea begins. In my 7th winter, when my head only reached my ape's rib, a white man came into camp. Bare trees scratched sky. Cold was endless. He moved through trees like strikes of sunlight. My Bia said he came with bad intentions, like a water baby's cry. Old ones said this man was the craziest white man they had seen. Young ones said this was the only white man they had seen. Our wise one, Flatbird, asked Agai River if this was the very white man sent from our old stories, but River did not answer. That is the opening of The Lost Journals of Sacajewea by Debra Magpie Earling. Looking forward to reading this probably in 2024. Now, I've actually already read this one too. I saw this in my local used bookstore when I was browsing, and had not expected to run into a copy of it. I just had to snatch it up. It's Address Unknown by Kathrine Kressman Taylor. I read this earlier this year. I actually listened to the audio. The audio is maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It's a very small book. You could definitely dunk this in your coffee. The book itself is 79 pages, and that contains a forward and an afterword that sort of gives context. So this was published in 1938. I believe it was published in a magazine and sort of reveals the lie that people in the United States had no way of knowing what was going on in Europe in the build-up to World War II or in the early days of World War II. So this is an epistolary novella, and it is about two friends. One has moved to Germany. The other is still in the United States. The one that's still in the United States is Jewish. The other is not. And the letters they send back and forth quickly get dark and reveal hidden prejudices and bias and the way you can be sort of weaponized by rhetoric. And it's very dark, very disturbing. It is like a sucker punch. For such a short story, it is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I would recommend this to you. I didn't expect to see a copy of it in print. And once I saw it, I thought I definitely would have that in my library. So it's weird to begin an epistolary novel. The first letter is dated November 12th, 1932. My dear Martin, back in Germany, how I envy you. Although I have not seen it since my school days, the spell of Unter den Linden is still strong upon me. The breadth of intellectual freedom, the discussions, the music, the light-hearted comradeship. And now the old Junker spirit, the Prussian arrogance, and militarism are gone. You go to a democratic Germany, a land with deep culture and the beginnings of a fine political freedom. It will be a good life. Oh, that is not what happens. That is not what ends up happening. But what an optimistic beginning to a sucker punch of a book. I would definitely recommend this if you haven't. This edition is published by Echo. I have wanted a copy of Zorrie by Laird Hunt for a long time, and I finally saw a copy in my local used bookstore, and I actually had credit that I could use, so I cashed it in and brought this home. I'm a huge fan of this book, and it's only small. So this would be well worth your time if you have not already read it. It is 160 pages, sheer perfection. And I am a really big fan of short novels that manage to pack such a punch. I mean, hello. And this is a really good one. So this sort of spans Depression era America. You follow Zorrie Underwood. She grows up. She loses both of her parents. She moves in with her aunt, who then orphans her all over again. And she sort of goes out into the world and ends up in Indiana. And there's a section in this book where she's working in a clock factory, and she is using essentially radium to paint glowing dials on clocks. And it's about the things that happen with that. To the women who have been working at the factory, she finds settles into life on a farm. It's about small life and the beauty of the everyday. And it's a very somber book, and just, I would say, achingly beautiful. I'm a huge fan of Zorrie. This is published by Bloomsbury, and the next book is going to tie back to this. So let's kind of jump to that one. But first, let's read the opening of Zorrie by Laird Hunt. Zorrie Underwood had been known throughout the county as a hard worker for more than 50 years, so it troubled her when finally the hoe started slipping from her hands, the paring knife from her fingers, the breath in shallow bursts from her lungs, and smack dab in the middle of the day, she had to lie down. At first, she carried out this previously unthinkable obligation on the worn leather of the daybed in the front room, with her jaw set, hands pressed tight against her sides, staring up at the end of a long crack that ran the length of the ceiling, or at the flecks of blue light thrown onto the legs of the dining room table by the stained glass J that hung in the south window. It's also very much about the passage of time, and you can tell there she's frustrated that she's getting older and not able to do the things that she used to do. So it is also very much about the passage of time and how things pass so quickly. And I would absolutely recommend this book. It is wonderful. So when I saw that Laird Hunt has a book coming out in 2024, I was extremely excited. I was even more excited when it turned out that that book has a connection to Zorrie. I believe Zorrie herself turns up in this. So this is Float Up, Sing Down by Laird Hunt. It's a story collection. I reached out to Bloomsbury and asked if they would consider sending me a review copy of it, and they actually agreed to do that. And I'm so excited. I'm including it in this book haul, even though it won't be out until February of next year, because this is me telling you, if you're a fan of Zorrie, pre-order this book. Contact your local independent bookstore, go to bookshop.org, reach out to your library, make sure they will be getting a copy, because if you're a fan of Zorrie, you are probably going to want to read this. I haven't read it yet, but I am so excited about this. And if you haven't read Zorrie yet, catch up to it, because I absolutely love it. Here's what's on the back of this book. Candy Wilson has forgotten to buy the paprika. Turner Davis needs to get his zinnias in. Della Dorner told her mother she was going to the Galaxy Swirl, but that's not where she's really headed on her new Schwinn 5-speed. Float Up, Sing Down is the story of a single day, but in that day, how much teeming life. The residents of this rural town have their routines, their preferences, their joys, grudges, and regrets. Gossip is paramount. Lives are entwined. Retired sheriffs climb corn bins and muse on lost love. French teachers throw firecrackers out of barn windows, and teenagers borrow motorcycles to ride the back roads. Each of the 14 stories of Float Up, Sing Down follows one character's day in the life in one of Hunt's most beloved and enduring landscapes. In the tradition of Willa Cather, Sherwood Anderson, Elizabeth Strout, and Edward P. Jones, this is a symphony of souls, a masterful portrait of both loneliness and community by one of our great limners of American experience. I am so looking forward to this book. Again, February 2024, and that is something that I think we can all look forward to. So the first story is called Candy, and here is how it begins. Candy Wilson had forgotten to buy the paprika. She had thought about it more than once that morning in town as she pushed her cart down shiny aisle after shiny owl at the marsh. Now it was clear to her that this thinking, this seeing of her hand scooping up the little red and white paprika tin, the way it actually scooped up eggs and orange jello and pineapple and carrots and real butter and a fresh jar of Hellmann's and every single other thing on her list, had taken the place of getting it done. Meaning, she had a problem. That's the beginning of Float Up, Sing Down by Laird Hunt, which will be coming in February of 2024. And I doubt anyone from Bloomsbury is watching this video, but if they are, thank you for sending this review copy. I cannot wait to read it. Next, a find from my local used bookstore, By the Lake by John McGahern. If you follow along, you know that Joel and I have been planning a trip to Ireland and Scotland next year, and I have been planning to read a lot of Irish and Scottish authors before we go. I read Nuala O'Foylin's memoir, Are You Somebody? In that book, she mentioned John McGahern, and I was immediately intrigued. And I think I would most like to read his collected stories. However, my local used bookstore had a copy of By the Lake, and I just grabbed it because, as I said, I want to read some Irish and Scottish authors before we go, and I think this will be a good one to read. With this magnificently assured new novel, John McGahern again reveals why he has been called the Irish Chekhov, as he guides us into a village in rural Ireland and deftly, compassionately traces its natural rhythms and the inner lives of its people. Here are the Rutledges, who have forsaken the glitter of London to raise sheep and cattle, gentle James E. Murphy, whose appetite for gossip both charms and intimidates his neighbors, handsome John Quinn, perennially on the lookout for a new wife, and the town's richest man, a gruff, self-made magnate known as the Shah. Should be really interesting. This edition is published by Vintage International, and here is how it begins. The morning was clear. There was no wind on the lake. There was also a great stillness. When the bells rang out for mass, the strokes trembling on the water, they had the entire world to themselves. By the Lake by John McGahern. We got a lot to cover, so we're going to move right along. Same reason I got By the Lake is why I got William Trevor's last stories. I did get another William Trevor book last month, but this was one that had been pretty directly recommended to me by Brian at Bookish. Thank you, Brian. So I had to cash in some trade at my local used bookstore in order to get this. So this is a story collection. With a career that spanned more than half a century, William Trevor is regarded as one of the best writers of short stories in the English language. Now in Last Stories, the master storyteller delivers 10 exquisitely rendered tales, 9 of which have never been published in book form, that illuminate the human condition and will surely linger in the reader's mind long after closing the book. And just because of time, I'm going to leave it at that and tell you that this edition is published by Viking. The first story is called The Piano Teacher's Pupil. Here is how it begins. The Brahms, she said. Shall we struggle through the Brahms? The boy, whose first lesson with Miss Nightingale this was, said nothing, but gazing at the silent metronome, he smiled a little, as if the silence pleased him. Then his fingers touched the piano keys, and when the first notes sounded, Miss Nightingale knew that she was in the presence of genius. That is the opening of Last Stories by William Trevor, an author I have been really looking forward to, even without the inspiration of Joel and I going to Ireland and Scotland. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Now we have Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. I got this because I needed to complete my Jhumpa Lahiri fiction collection. This was the only one of her fiction books that I did not own. Saw it at my local used bookstore, snapped it up. This book is a big departure for Jhumpa Lahiri, who is one of my favorite authors. I recently did a deep dive about her debut, Interpreter of Maladies, which won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. That will be linked down below. And I liked this. It's very different from all of her other books. This was the first book that first fiction book that she wrote in Italian and then translated into English. It's a very interesting book. It's published by Knopf. Here's what it says. Whereabouts celebrates ordinary life and community while exploring existential themes of presence and absence. Lahiri's narrator, a woman questioning her place in the world, wavers between stasis and movement, between the need to belong and a refusal to form lasting ties. The city she calls home acts as her companion and interlocutor. Traversing the streets around her house and in parks, piazzas, museums, stores, and coffee bars, she feels less alone. We follow her to pools she frequents and to the train station that leads to her mother, who is mired in her own solitude after her husband's untimely death. And we'll leave it at that, again, for the sake of pacing. Here is how Whereabouts opens. On the sidewalk. In the mornings after breakfast, I walk past a small marble plaque propped against the high wall flanking the road. I never knew the man who died, but over the years I've come to know his name, his surname. I know the month and day he was born and the month and day his life ended. This was a man who died 2 days after his birthday in February. That is Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. I love her as a writer, so I just needed to complete the set. Then I was at the library picking up a book, and I saw a copy of Telephone by Percival Everett for sale for $1, so I snapped it up. This was Percival Everett's Pulitzer Prize finalist book, and I've heard really good things about all of his books. I really need to read The Trees. That is probably the first book of his that I will read, but I've heard a lot of good things about Telephone, and I would like to catch up to it, especially since it does have that sort of Pulitzer connection. Zach Wells, a laconic geologist/paleobiologist, has the trappings of a comfortable life, yet is not contented. He's expert in the geological history of a cave in the Grand Canyon, but less so where his wife and daughter are concerned. And when his daughter develops unusual vision problems and has a seizure, the world of this family of three crumbles. Powerless in the face of his daughter's slow deterioration, Wells finds a note asking for help tucked into a jacket he's ordered online and sets off on a quixotic rescue mission. In Telephone, a deeply affecting novel of loss, grief, and renewal, Percival Everett outdoes even himself. This is published by Grey Wolf Press. Can't wait to read Percival Everett for the first time. Here is how it begins. The first chapter is called Duck, Duck, Goose. People, and by people I mean them, never look for truth. They look for satisfaction. There is nothing worse, certain painful and deadly diseases notwithstanding, than an unsatisfactory, piss-poor truth, whereas a satisfactory lie is all too easy to accept, even embrace, get cozy with. That is the opening of Telephone by Percival Everett. Again, we're going to try to move along because we are probably not even halfway. But again, I'm going to really speed up once we start going through, and I'll probably start speeding up with this one. The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. I'm a huge fan of Barbara Kingsolver. Demon Copperhead was my favorite read from last year. I read The Bean Trees a long time ago after I read the Poisonwood Bible and loved it so much. If you haven't read the Poisonwood Bible, read the Poisonwood Bible. It's fantastic. Thank me later. The Bean Trees is about a woman who leaves her Appalachian home, hoping not to fall into the routines that have trapped every member of her family and have already been trapping a lot of her friends. She is intending to go, I believe, to California, but don't quote me on that, but she's definitely going west. She ends up stuck in Tucson, Arizona for various reasons, and just kind of life happens. She finds a toddler in her backseat and tries to place it. The toddler ends up staying with her, and she ends up with a life that is very much not what she would have predicted for herself. And I love this book. I think it was absolutely fantastic. I believe it was Barbara Kingsolver's first book, but don't quote me on that. And this is a beautiful edition of it that Joel found for me in his travels. And let's just read from the opening of this book. This edition is from Harper Perennial, by the way. Chapter 1, The One to Get Away. I have been afraid of putting air in a tire ever since I saw a tractor tire blow up and throw Newt Hardbine's father over the top of the Standard Oil sign. I'm not lying. He got stuck up there. About 19 people congregated during the time it took for Norman Strick to walk up to the courthouse and blow the whistle for the volunteer fire department. They eventually did come with a ladder and haul him down, and he wasn't dead, but lost his hearing, and in many other ways was never the same afterward. They said he overfilled the tire. That's the beginning of The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. So I'm going to be very quick with this one. It's The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I've sort of been going back and forth about whether or not I want a copy of this because I DNF'd this. It's probably the only Louise Erdrich book that I have DNF'd so far. I still have a lot of her books to read, but I have been collecting all of her books, so I figured I should make sure I get this one. And I think part of why I DNF'd it is that it is a pandemic novel. I started reading it at a time when I was just not ready for a pandemic novel. Maybe I'll have better luck now that there have been other pandemic novels now, and so who knows, maybe I'll have better luck with it, but we'll leave it at that. This is from Harper Perennial. It is a fusion of it's set in a bookstore that is clearly supposed to call to mind Birchbark Books, which is Louise Erdrich's bookstore in Minneapolis. If you haven't been to Birchbark Books, it's a really cute store. I have been there. And this book begins Earth to Earth. While in prison, I received a dictionary. It was sent to me with a note. This is the book I would take to a deserted island. Other books were to arrive from my teacher, but as she had known, this one proved of endless use. The first word I looked up was the word sentence. And right there on the first page, you have a title. So that's The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I saw a copy of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway in my library. So again, I picked this up for $1. It's just a fun vintage edition that's in really good condition. So I could actually read this if I want and not feel like I was going to be doing any damage. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. This edition is published by Scribner. We're going to fly along. At the library, I also saw this copy of Torch Song Trilogy, a play by Harvey Fierstein, which I have never read, and I've never seen the film version of it either. But I saw it and absolutely could not resist, so I had to pick it up. This is published by Villard Books, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. And I love that sort of vintage cover. For time, I'm going to keep going. The Color of Water by James McBride. Found this at my local used bookstore, and this is a memoir about his life. He has a white mother and a black father. I believe that's the way it goes. And I believe she would tell him, because he would kind of ask, well, what color am I? And she'd say, you're the color of water. It's a memoir about his life and growing up and race. It's supposed to be absolutely fantastic. I'm a big fan of James McBride because of The Good Lord Bird. I had less success with Deacon King Kong, but I'm really looking forward to reading The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store as well. This is very much on my list of things to get to. We're kind of going to fly along now. So now we get to the books that were sent to me by a subscriber, Marcia Johansson. Thank you, Marcia. The first is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. I had mentioned that I wanted to, I want to read an Amor Towles book, and I have not yet. So she sent me Rules of Civility, and I'm really looking forward to reading that at some point. She also sent Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This was featured on Time's 100 Best Mysteries or Thrillers. I'll link that video down below as well. And I had mentioned that I hadn't read it, but did read Little Fires Everywhere. So here's a copy of Everything I Never Told You. Same reason she sent me Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. So here that book is. She also sent The Beautiful Mystery by Louise Penny and Gillian Flynn's Sharp Objects, which I've heard really good things about. And again, all of these are connected to that Time video. And she says I said that I am the cheese in a video. I have no recollection of that, but very funny. She sent me this by Robert Cormier as well. So thank you to Marcia. I'm sorry I'm kind of blowing through these books because that finishes my first pile. Now we got to get to the second pile. So we're just moving really quickly at this point, but I am very grateful and looking forward to reading these books at some point. So I've pulled this next pile closer. These are the books that I got at the sale at the Historic Museum at Fort Missoula. So the first one is Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. This is a book that I've heard a lot of really great things about over the years. I have never actually read it. I don't have immediate plans to read it, but this is sort of aspirational book purchasing. It's a library builder, something that I'm kind of hoping that because I have it in my library, someday I will get around to reading it. Maybe if I don't know what my next book is going to be, I'll be looking through my library and I will see it on the shelf and think, you know what, I'm going to read that. Antonio Morez is 6 years old when Ultima comes to stay with his family in New Mexico. She is a curandera, one who cures with herbs and magic. Under her wise wing, Tony will probe the family ties that bind and rend him, and he will discover himself in the magical secrets of the pagan past, a mythic legacy as palpable as the Catholicism of Latin America. And at each life turn, there is Ultima, who delivered Tony into the world and will nurture the birth of his soul. Let's just quickly do the first sentence of this, mostly because I'm curious. Ultima came to stay with us the summer I was almost 7. When she came, the beauty of the Ilano unfolded before my eyes, and the gurgling waters of the river sang to the hum of the turning earth. Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. Now, I got this one just because there's a Pulitzer connection. So John P. Marquand won a Pulitzer Prize for a book called The Late George Apley. I thought this was hilarious. It's something called Life at Happy Knoll. I did Google it, and the review that I found was not really great, but what a fun cover. And, you know, since I didn't have to really pay much for this, I was just paying $10 for a bag, I threw it in and decided, you know what, I'm going to hold on to it. No sense spending a lot of time on what this is. Basically, it's about people at a country club, I believe, and the misbehavior going on and all of the riotous stuff. And yeah, so that's kind of what it is. Just for fun. Oh, an illustration. There you go. I love a book with an illustration. Just for fun, the opening is, Dear Jeffrey Cutbutton, the whole welcoming committee of the Happy Knoll Country Club have asked me as their chairman to extend their thanks for our wholly delightful visit yesterday afternoon at your new home, and especially for the opportunity to meet your charming family. So I admit I only got that because of the Pulitzer connection. I got Whose Body by Dorothy Sayers, and actually I have already read this because this also goes back to the Time 100 Best Mysteries and Thrillers list. And I mentioned that I had not read a Dorothy Sayers book, and a lot of people commented to say that since I like a classic whodunit and have liked Agatha Christie books, this would be one to do. I have read it. I thought it was okay. I will probably continue in the series, but I'll talk more about this in a future Friday Reads, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to throw this in my bag and get it. So the premise is pretty much exactly the title. A dead body just turns up in a guy's bathtub, and Lord Peter Wimsey investigates. And at first, people think the guy in the bathtub might be a man who went missing in the town. So there's sort of a second mystery, and, they were kind of wondering if they will end up being connected. I'll talk more about this in a future Friday Reads, but that's Whose Body by Dorothy Sayers. Flying along, I also saw 2 Neo Marsh books. I had been trying the Neo Marsh books, again, because I sort of like the classic whodunits. And they had 2 of them, Surfeit of Lampreys and Death in a White Tie. And I really couldn't pass that up. So, because I am going to continue in the series, not going to rush my way through. So here they are. Hi, you might have noticed that I looked confused as I was talking about these books, and that's because I was pretty sure I had a copy of Death and Ecstasy as well, which actually is the next book in this series that I need to read. And when I finished the video and started putting things away, what do you know, Death and Ecstasy was on my shelf. So I forgot this, and I just dropped a book, so everything's a mess. Back to the rest of the video. And same goes for this next group of books. They had a bunch of Donna Leon books, so I picked up a bunch of them. They are not in order. The first book in the series is actually not here. These are Death in a Strange Country, A Sea of Troubles, Willful Behavior, Suffer the Little Children, and The Girl of His Dreams. But I figure this is sort of a start. I've heard a lot of really great things about Donna Leon books, so I will give them a try at some point. I do want to hold out for the first book, but in the meantime, I will have these, and if I end up not liking it, I can always trade them in. But I just really couldn't pass up the opportunity to grab them. Next, Alice Munro, The Beggar Maid. Alice Munro, I believe, is a Nobel laureate at this point, and I just saw her on the table, and honestly, I just kind of grabbed it without even knowing what it was about. And then when I got home, I did look at it. So it's a series of interweaving stories in which Alice Munro recreates the evolving bond, one that is both constricting and empowering, between 2 women in the course of almost 40 years. One is Flo, practical, suspicious of other people's airs, at times dismayingly vulgar. The other is Rose, Flo's stepdaughter, a clumsy, shy girl who somehow, in spite of Flo's ridicule and ghastly warnings, leaves the small town she grew up in to achieve her own equivocal success in the larger world. Let's do the opening of this book, just for fun. Royal beating. That was Flo's promise. You were going to get one royal beating. Let's just stop there, because that's a really fun opening to The Beggar Maid by Alice Munro. Now we get back to William Trevor. I saw one of his books on the table, immediately picked it up and threw it in the bag, and again, didn't even know what it was about. So this is 2 lives, 2 novels, 2 women who retreat further into the realm of the imagination until the boundaries between what is real and what is not become blurred. I would probably do the other 2 William Trevor books first, but I really just kind of couldn't pass this up. So Reading Turgenev opens... A woman, not yet 57, slight and seeming frail, eats carefully at a table in a corner. Her slices of buttered bread have been halved for her, her fried egg mashed, her bacon cut. Well, this is happiness, she murmurs aloud, but none of the other women in the dining room replies because none of them is near enough to hear. 2 Lives by William Trevor, an author I'm really hoping to squeeze in before I leave for Ireland and Scotland. If you follow along, you know I read a book by Edna Ferber earlier this year, and I was obsessed. I loved it. It was Fanny Herself. And if you're in the UK, I know that's a funny title. There's nothing I can do about it, but here we go. So I've been collecting her books, and I saw this copy of Great Sun. It is not in great condition. This makes me extremely nervous, but I think this might be a first edition of the... Yeah, it is a first edition of the book. So I'm just going to be really careful with it. I'm not even going to really handle it very much. I'm just going to tell you I got a copy of Great Sun by Edna Ferber. Unfortunately, this is not a copy that I would feel comfortable reading, but it'll do just fine on my shelf. In a total coincidence, I saw Ann Patchett in a video that she does on Fridays. Basically, she says, if you haven't read this, it's new to you, where she talks about backlist titles for her bookstore, Parnassus. She has mentioned her favorite books in some recent editions of it. She talked about a book by Haldor Laxness called Independent People. That is her all-time favorite book. And she mentioned The Leopard, which is kind of up there. This is by Giuseppe de Lampedusa. This is a Pantheon Modern Classics edition. And there is a translator because this is an Italian book. Archibald Colquhoun is the translator. I had never heard of this book before, but the way she talked about it made me feel like I wanted a copy and would just keep an eye out for it. And then I saw it at this sale, so I just picked it up and threw it in my bag. It's a historical novel widely recognized as a masterpiece of European fiction. She talked about it being the best-selling book in Italy. I have not fact-checked that, but it sounded really interesting, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to bring that one home. Someone recommended Daisy Faye and the Miracle Man by Fanny Flagg to me a while back because I had liked Fried Green Tomatoes. So they said that this was sort of the best of her other books. So I saw a copy and immediately picked it up and put it in the bag. We're just going to fly through it for time. Sebastian Barry on Canaan Side. I have a copy of, I'm blanking on what the book is, another one of his books that people had really recommended to me, and I just saw this, and Sebastian Barry has really been in the conversation because he was longlisted for the Booker Prize again this year, so I figured there's no harm in picking this up and seeing if I get to it at some point. Heartburn by Nora Ephron. First it's Nora Ephron. I've heard good things about Heartburn, but also look at this really fun cover of this book. I don't think this one is a first edition, but that's fine. It is not a first edition, but again, that's fine. It's just a really fun sort of vintage hardcover of this book. There's Nora Ephron on the back, and I couldn't pass that up. 2 more books to go. First, we have The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. I have had very mixed results reading Philip Roth books. I will have to read American Pastoral for my Pulitzer Prize project. This is one of the books that people frequently bring up when they encourage me to read more Philip Roth. So I figured, well, hey, it's here at this sale. I'm just going to put it in my bag and walk away. And for timing purposes, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sorry. I'll just tell you because I'm not going to read the description on the inside of the book. But this is sort of an alternate history where Charles Lindbergh, I believe it's Charles Lindbergh. Let me just double check. Yeah, Charles Lindbergh defeats Franklin Roosevelt for a presidential election. Charles Lindbergh was sort of anti-Semitic. And so it's an alternate history about what happens when World War II hits and you have someone who is anti-Semitic in the Oval Office. And let's do the beginning of the book really quickly. 1. June 1940, October 1940. Vote for Lindbergh or vote for war. Fear presides over these memories, a perpetual fear. Of course, no childhood is without its terrors, yet I wonder if I would have been a less frightened boy if Lindbergh hadn't been president or if I hadn't been the offspring of Jews. Really beautiful back to this book as well. So that's The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. The final book, The True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey. I've heard a lot. I can always say The True History. It's not The True History. It's True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey. I've heard so many good things about this book over the years. And they had this really beautiful hardcover edition of it. I actually don't remember if this is a first edition or not, so bear with me a moment. It's the first American edition, and actually when I opened it, there's a map. If you follow along, you know I love a book with a map. Just makes me happy. And actually there's also an illustration. Look at that. I'm not going to tell you what this is about. You can probably guess from the title. If you're not familiar with the Kelly Gang, you know, Google is going to be your friend. I've heard so many really good things about this book. Here is how it opens. It opens with a quote from William Faulkner. "The past is not dead. It is not even past." Oh, there's an illustration at the beginning. I love a book with illustrations too, so that's also fun. By dawn, at least half the members of the Kelly Gang were badly wounded, and it was then the creature appeared from behind police lines. It was nothing human, that much was evident. It had no head, but a very long, thick neck and an immense chest, and it walked with a slow, ungainly gait directly into a hail of bullets. Shot after shot was fired without effect, and the figure continued to advance on the police, stopping every now and then to move its headless neck slowly and mechanically around. That is True History of the Kelly Gang by Peter Carey, and that is the largest book haul I have ever done. If you have thoughts about all of these books or any of these books, if you have recommendations about which ones you think I should prioritize or any of that, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.